The slam echoed like a gunshot. Julian Carter's chest hit the blistering hood of the patrol car, the heat from sun-baked metal burning through his t-shirt. His Rolex screeched against the paint, leaving both a scar on the car and a welt on his wrist. "Hands behind your back, now!" Officer Briggs barked, twisting Julian's arms with a practiced cruelty. A knee dug into his spine, grinding bone against steel. Around them, the sidewalk froze. Shoppers halted mid-step, grocery bags dangling, mouths half open. Then came the phones. Screens lifted, lenses focused, recording lights blinking red. The crowd was transforming into witnesses in real time. Julian's face, pressed against the metal, remained composed, his jaw tight but his eyes clear, almost unnervingly calm. "I've done nothing wrong," he said evenly, his Harvard ring flashing in the sun as the cuffs ratcheted tighter. "They never do," Briggs sneered. "Your kind always has excuses." Reynolds, his partner, emptied Julian's pockets onto the hood. Keys clattered. A leather wallet spilled open, fanning its contents. Inside, half concealed, a government ID card caught the light. Reynolds glanced at it and moved past, uninterested, picking instead at credit cards with a smirk. The crowd stirred. Someone shouted, "That man didn't do anything." A woman's voice trembled but held steady. "I saw him shopping. That's all. Back up." Briggs roared, hand hovering near his holster. "Police business." Phones stayed up, fingers kept recording, and Julian, cuffed and humiliated on a city street, knew this was no accident, no misunderstanding. It was the same story told too many times in America, except this time, it wasn't just any man. This time, the wrong man was in those cuffs, 15 minutes earlier. The boutique smelled of Wealth leather, cedar polish, and the faint trace of cologne meant to reassure customers they belonged here. Rows of Italian shoes gleamed beneath amber light, each pair lined up like trophies. The sales attendant, thin tie choking his throat, hovered nervously behind the counter, eyes darting every time Julian lifted a shoe to examine the stitching. Julian Carter was 40, but looked younger in his simple black t-shirt and dark jeans. He wore no jewelry beyond his watch, no flashy logos, no ostentation. His wealth lived in understatement. Years in federal courtrooms had taught him to appear grounded, never gaudy. Still, the clerk's suspicion thickened the air like humidity. Julian felt it but gave no acknowledgement. He selected a pair of loafers, supple leather, perfect lines. At the register, he slid a platinum card across the counter with steady hands. The clerk fumbled with the machine, fingers trembling, before pressing a hidden button beneath the counter. The silent alarm. Julian's eyes flicked to the motion, but his face never changed. He signed the receipt, bag in hand, posture upright. He could have spoken then, could have asked why, could have confronted the prejudice naked in that twitch of the clerk's finger. But silence, he knew, often spoke louder. As Julian stepped out into the sun, the boutique's security guard fell into step behind him, shadowing discreetly. Across the street, a patrol car slowed. Inside, Officer Briggs leaned forward, squinting through the window. "That guy looks out of place," Briggs muttered. Reynolds yawned. "We're due for break." "This won't take long." Briggs was already reaching for the door handle. Julian hadn't walked 10 feet when the voice carried sharp across the sidewalk. "Sir, we need a word." He stopped, turned, bag dangling loosely at his side. "Is there a problem? Officers?" His tone was polite, firm, professional. "We received a report of suspicious activity," Reynolds said, staring at the bag like it was stolen. Julian raised it, producing the receipt tucked neatly inside. "I just made a purchase. Everything is documented." "ID, now," Briggs ordered. Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" "Because we said so," Briggs snapped, hand resting on his taser. That's reason enough. It wasn't the first time Julian had faced presumption instead of evidence. He knew the choreography: calm voice, deliberate movement, every word an insurance policy. "I'm reaching for my wallet," he said clearly, hand moving slowly. Before he could open it, Briggs yanked it away, thumbing through the contents. He ignored the driver's license, ignored the folded credential embossed with a government seal. What caught his attention was the card embossed in platinum. "Amex," Briggs said, holding it up like contraband. "You sure this is yours?" The boutique clerk burst out from the door, pointing. "That's him. He was acting strange, looking at things he couldn't afford." Julian's jaw clenched. He'd just spent $1,200 in that store. "Anyone can steal a card," Briggs declared, raising his voice so the sidewalk could hear. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "On what charge?" "Resisting an officer." Briggs shot back. Julian didn't move. "I haven't resisted anything." "About to," Reynolds said, stepping closer, invading space. The tension was magnetic, pulling eyes, drawing bodies. A crowd gathered: office workers on lunch break, shoppers juggling bags, a college kid already live streaming. "He wasn't doing anything," an older woman shouted. "Back up," Briggs bellowed. "Police business." Julian exhaled slowly, then turned. "I am cooperating," he said, lifting his hands. "But this is unlawful detention." "Save it for the judge." Reynolds jerked his wrists, snapping the cuffs. The metal bit deep, too tight by design. The crowd murmured angrily. Phones leaned in closer. Briggs pushed Julian against the car, hot metal burning through fabric, watch screeching across paint. Cameras caught the moment in high definition, the Harvard ring glinting defiantly against steel. The image of dignity shackled. Reynolds spread Julian's belongings across the hood: keys, receipts, a slim leather notebook. He flipped through it theatrically. "What's this? Drug deals?" Julian's voice was calm. "Notes from a legal proceeding." "Sure," Reynolds scoffed. "Everyone's a lawyer when they're cuffed." A young woman in the crowd kept filming, steady hand trained on badge numbers. Her eyes met Julian's. For a fraction of a second, he gave the smallest nod. She understood. This wasn't just a scene, it was evidence. Briggs tightened the cuffs again, smirking at Julian's silence. "Stand still." He hadn't moved. They shoved him to the curb, forcing him down in a humiliating posture. Knees bent awkwardly, spine curved, arms wrenched behind him. Still, he sat tall as possible, chin level, gaze unbroken. His body screamed of restraint, but his eyes radiated calculation. And then, his phone still lying on the hood, buzzed. The screen lit with a single name: Marcus. Briggs didn't notice, but the woman with the phone did. She glanced at Julian, back at the phone, then to a bystander beside her. A whispered plan. A nod. The man slipped casually toward the car, pretending to check his own phone. In a heartbeat, Julian's device disappeared into his palm, tucked away as Briggs barked at another bystander. Half a mile away, Marcus Carter glanced at his own watch in the Justice Department conference room. Tall, commanding, Attorney General of the United States. "We need to wrap this up," he said, gathering papers. "Dinner with my brother tonight." His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He frowned but answered. "Attorney General Carter," a woman's voice, urgent. "Your brother is being detained outside Luxco Boutique. He's in cuffs. We're recording everything." Marcus froze, then stood so abruptly his chair skidded. His aides scrambled to keep up as his stride cut through corridors. "Where exactly?" His voice was low, lethal. "Keep filming. Don't interfere, but keep filming." On Wisconsin Avenue, the crowd swelled. Murmurs grew louder. Phones stayed up. The image of Julian Carter cuffed, pressed against steel, silent but unbroken, was already traveling farther than that block, farther than that city. And 3 black SUVs had just made a sudden U-turn, Sirens dark, moving fast. The black SUVs appeared without fanfare, but their presence was undeniable. Dark paint gleamed under the summer sun, tinted windows reflecting the restless crowd. They moved with the fluid precision of government vehicles accustomed to cutting through traffic, sirens silent, engines low and purposeful. Sarge? Reynolds muttered into his radio as the convoy slowed. We've got company. Briggs didn't even look up. His knee stayed pressed into Julian's back. Ignore it. Keep control of the scene. But the crowd knew better. Heads turned, whispers spread, cameras tilted toward the street as the convoy edged closer. A few in the crowd recognized the plate's government issue, authority of a different caliber. Julian said nothing, but a barely perceptible smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. His wrists burned under the cuffs, shoulders screamed from the strain, but his mind had already leapt 3 moves ahead. The SUVs stopped with military precision. Doors opened, men in dark suits and mirrored sunglasses stepped out, scanning the crowd with sharp, economical movements. Their posture spoke louder than words. Federal. Briggs shifted uneasily, glancing at Reynolds. Secret Service. Reynolds swallowed hard. They don't show up to shoplifting calls. The crowd hushed as the final car door opened. From it emerged Marcus Carter tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a navy suit tailored like armor. His presence hit like a ripple through the onlookers. People leaned in, phones rose higher, murmurs turned to sharp intakes of breath. The Attorney General, someone whispered, awe threading through the syllables. Briggs's face drained of color. You've got to be kidding me. Marcus didn't break stride. His long steps carried him directly toward the scene, aides hustling to keep pace, agents forming a perimeter. His gaze locked on his brother, cuffed and crouched on the curb, sweat streaking down his temple, yet posture unbroken. Julian! Marcus's voice was low, steady, but carried weight that silenced even the crowd. Are you hurt? Julian raised his eyes, meeting his brother's. Nothing permanent. His tone was calm, but edged with steel. My civil rights took more damage than my body. The sergeant from an unmarked car hurried forward, nearly tripping over his words. Sir, this is a misunderstanding. Uncuff him, Marcus interrupted, voice brooking no delay. Briggs stammered. But sir, There is no but. Marcus's tone cut clean, cold. Uncuff him! Now! The crowd erupted in murmurs, phones zooming in, live streams exploding with comments. Carter trended before Briggs even fumbled with the key. The cuffs clicked open, leaving red grooves etched into Julian's wrists. He rubbed them slowly, deliberately, a silent reminder of what had just been taken from him. My watch, Julian said calmly, eyes never leaving Briggs. It was in my pocket. Briggs hesitated, then checked the patrol car. His hand trembled as he retrieved the Rolex, placing it back in Julian's palm. Thank you. Julian slid it onto his wrist with quiet dignity. The young woman who had filmed everything stepped forward. She held Julian's phone, the screen still warm from its earlier buzz. Sir, she said, her voice steady though her hands shook. I have your phone. I kept recording. Julian accepted it with a nod of gratitude. Your civic engagement is appreciated. He glanced at her badge lanyard swinging from her bag. Law student? Yes, Georgetown. Then you know what this means, Julian said softly. Her eyes widened. She did. Every violation, every unlawful word, every second captured now evidence. Marcus turned to the sergeant, his voice carrying for the cameras as much as the officers. I want a full incident report on my desk by morning. Yes, Runner, sir. The sergeant's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. Briggs tried to recover ground. We were just doing our job. Your job, Julian finally spoke, rising to his full height, taller now without the weight of cuffs. His tone was still calm, but edged like glass. Your job was to detain a citizen without probable cause? To ignore a government ID? To tighten cuffs until my hands went numb? Cameras captured every syllable. Reporters at the edge of the crowd shouted questions. Microphones thrust forward. Mr. Attorney General, was your brother targeted? Marcus raised a hand for quiet. His eyes swept the gathering. Today is both personal and professional. What happened here represents exactly the kind of law enforcement overreach my office is dedicated to ending. Julian stepped forward, shoulders squared, voice steady enough to cut through the noise. I was detained without cause. My identification ignored. I was handcuffed, searched, and humiliated for doing nothing but shopping. The boutique clerk, pale and sweating, tried to retreat into the store, but the crowd turned, cameras swinging his way. His manager rushed out, stammering apologies. Mr. Carter, we didn't realize. Realize what? Julian asked, his voice sharp, resonating with the crowd. That black men can afford luxury goods? The murmurs swelled into applause, a slow clap starting and spreading until half the street echoed with it. Marcus placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, steadying, grounding. This stops today, he said, eyes locked on Briggs and Reynolds. Not just for Julian Carter, but for every citizen who has faced the same abuse without cameras or witnesses. News vans screeched to a halt at the block's end, reporters tumbling out with cameras already rolling. Helicopters circled overhead, blades chopping the summer sky. A street detention had become a national moment in less than 20 minutes. Briggs's voice faltered. We had a call about suspicious activity. From whom? Julian asked, cutting him off. All eyes turned to the boutique clerk. His lips moved soundlessly, excuses dying in his throat. This isn't about one bad officer or one nervous clerk, Marcus said, voice steady, broadcast ready. This is about a system that assumes guilt first and asks questions never. The crowd roared. Phones buzzed with notifications. The hashtag shifted. Justice for Julian. Reynolds stared at the ground, already imagining the investigation to come. Briggs clenched his jaw, but sweat trickled down his temple. Their careers had just shifted under their feet, and they knew it. Julian faced the crowd now, his voice carrying across the street. What happened to me happens to people without platforms, without connections, without the Attorney General as a brother. Most stories never make headlines. Today, one did. But tomorrow, the system must answer. The applause thundered louder, building momentum. Reporters jostled forward. Cameras zoomed in. The Carter brothers stood shoulder to shoulder, framed by flashing lights and buzzing helicopters. This was no longer a sidewalk scuffle. It was a spark, already igniting a fire far bigger than the street it began on. And Briggs, standing pale and trembling, realized too late. His 20 minutes of bias had just collided with a lifetime of consequences. The sidewalks had become an arena. Dozens of phones glowed like torches, illuminating a scene that no one could quite believe they were witnessing. What began as a simple police stop was now something else entirely, a spectacle. Reporters elbowed through the crowd, camera operators lifting rigs onto shoulders, boom mics jutting over heads. Sirens warbled in the distance, not from the patrol cars already on the scene, but from the news vans screaming into position at the block's edge. Overhead, a helicopter circled lazily, its camera eye trained downward. Julian Carter, wrists raw from the cuffs, adjusted the sleeve of his black t-shirt and stood taller, straighter. His dignity was intact, but the red marks on his skin told a different story. The humiliation had been real, deliberate, and now broadcast. Briggs tried to cling to procedure, shouting orders that no one obeyed. Clear the sidewalk, back up, or face obstruction. His voice cracked against the wall of voices, drowned out by the chant beginning to rise. Let him speak. Let him speak. The rhythm caught like fire. Marcus Carter raised a hand, and the crowd obeyed almost instinctively, the noise thinning to a charged silence. Every lens turned toward the Attorney General, but his eyes stayed locked on the two officers. "Explain yourselves," Marcus commanded. Briggs stammered. We had a suspicious activity report." "From whom?" Marcus pressed. All heads swiveled toward the boutique clerk. The young man shrank backward, his mouth dry. Words tangled. His manager grabbed his arm, pulling him half behind her. "This is a misunderstanding," she pleaded. Julian stepped forward, voice even but ringing clear. "A misunderstanding that began with a button under a counter, a button pressed not because of theft, not because of evidence, but because of an assumption." He paused. "That I couldn't possibly belong." The words landed heavy. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others clenching fists around phone cases. A reporter shouted from behind the camera line, "Mr. Carter, who are you?" Julian turned toward the lenses, his expression composed, almost courtroom ready. "My name is Julian Carter. I live 6 blocks from here. I was shopping." Another voice cut through, urgent. "But why were the officers ignoring your ID?" Julian reached into his wallet, pulling free the folded leather credential they had skipped. He flipped it open, holding it high enough for cameras to zoom in. The gold seal glimmered in the afternoon sun. "Chief Counsel, Civil Rights Division." The crowd gasped. Briggs and Reynolds froze, faces draining of blood. Julian continued, his tone steady but edged. "I have spent my career reviewing hundreds of unlawful detentions, just like this one. Today, I became another case file." The reaction was instant. Reporters screamed questions, microphones thrust closer. Live stream comments scrolled faster than fingers could track. "He's a federal lawyer, civil rights counsel, cuffed in public." They messed with the wrong guy. Marcus didn't have to raise his voice to be heard. "This isn't just a mistake. This is an indictment of a system that allows bias to masquerade as policing." A cheer erupted, swelling until it became a roar. The chant returned, louder now, carrying over the avenue. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Reynolds looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. Briggs clenched his jaw, sweat dripping down his temple, eyes darting for an escape that didn't exist. Julian faced the crowd, voice carrying above the chant. "What happened to me today happens to people without cameras, without witnesses, without connections. The difference is that their stories disappear. This one won't." The statement struck like a match. Hashtags lit up across screens nationwide. "Hurry, justice for Julian, Michael Carter brothers." "Bias in blue." Within minutes, the story leapt from live streams to cable news crawls. The boutique manager tried again, desperation cracking her voice. "Mr. Carter, please, we had no idea." Julian cut her off sharply. "No idea that black customers could afford your products? No idea that pressing an alarm without cause could ruin a man's life? No idea that your suspicion would unleash all of this?" He swept his hand at the patrol cars, the officers, the sea of cameras. Her mouth opened, then closed. She had no answer. Marcus's aides tugged at his sleeve, murmuring about optics, about statements, about control. He shook them off. "Control was lost the second those cuffs closed," he said. Then, to the reporters, "This is exactly why my office is opening a comprehensive review of biased policing practices across the district." Microphones erupted with questions. "Is this personal now? Will the officers face charges? What message do you want Americans to hear?" Marcus raised his hand for silence. "Of course it's personal, but it's more than that. It's professional. When law enforcement acts on prejudice instead of evidence, they undermine the very system they swore to uphold. And when companies create cultures where suspicion is normalized, they invite injustice to walk through their doors." The crowd roared approval. Phones shot higher. Helicopter cameras zoomed tighter. Julian stepped closer to the microphones. "Today I was profiled, detained, and humiliated. Tomorrow, if unchecked, it will be someone else. That is why this ends here. Not because I am who I am, but because every citizen deserves equal protection under the law. The slow clap began again, louder this time, until the entire block thundered with it. Briggs flinched with each strike of palm against palm, each sound a nail in his career's coffin. The sergeant, pale and sweating, approached Marcus. "Sir, Officers Briggs and Reynolds are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Internal Affairs you'll deliver your findings to my office directly," Marcus cut in. "Yes, sir." The announcement rippled through the crowd like electricity. Phones recorded Briggs's face as the words sank in, relieved of duty. Julian slid his wallet back into his pocket, then extended his wrist toward the nearest camera. Red grooves from the cuffs glowed angry against his skin. "This," he said quietly, voice amplified by microphones, "is the mark of a system that must change." Gasps, murmurs, and then chants again. His words had branded themselves into the narrative. From the far side of the crowd, another shout rose, this time not from a protester, but a reporter clutching a live mic. "Mr. Carter, will you sue the department?" Julian's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about settlements. This is about precedent." Marcus nodded, his voice following seamlessly. "And precedent begins today." The roar of the crowd swelled until it drowned even the helicopters above. Phones shook with adrenaline. Live streams overflowed with hearts and comments. For 20 excruciating minutes, Julian Carter had been humiliated on a public sidewalk. Now, in less than half that time, the humiliation had flipped into a reckoning that would echo across the nation. Briggs whispered to Reynolds, his voice trembling. "We're screwed." Reynolds didn't answer. He just stared at the ground, knowing the truth. They weren't just screwed. They were history. A week later, the echo of that sidewalk confrontation hadn't faded. It had multiplied. What began on Wisconsin Avenue now reverberated in boardrooms, police precincts, courtrooms, and living rooms across the country. The boutique where it began, Luxco, had once prided itself on exclusivity, but in its sleek Manhattan headquarters, exclusivity now meant disaster. Charts filled the wall screens, red arrows plunging down. The PR director's voice trembled as she clicked through slides. "We've lost 20% of our market value in 7 days, she reported. Celebrity clients are canceling orders. Hashtags calling for boycott are trending nationwide. Children boycott Luxco. Children bias in luxury. And of course, justice for Julian. We're hemorrhaging both money and credibility." The CEO slammed his fist on the mahogany table. "Fire the clerk immediately. Issue an apology." "That won't be enough," the legal counsel said flatly, flipping through a thick folder. "The Attorney General himself is involved. His brother is the Chief Counsel for Civil Rights. The Justice Department has already subpoenaed our training materials, incident reports, and internal communications for the past 5 years." The CFO's voice cracked. "How bad?" "Bad," the counsel said. "They're not looking at one employee. They're looking for a pattern. And from my review, they'll find one." Silence filled the room, broken only by the nervous tapping of the PR director's pen. Luxco's gleaming empire, built on image, now teetered on exposure. Meanwhile, across town, the police department squirmed under its own spotlight. Internal Affairs investigators sat across from Officer Briggs in a windowless room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A recorder blinked red on the table. "Officer Briggs," the investigator began, "why did you initiate contact with Julian Carter?" Briggs shifted in his chair, sweat glistening on his temple. "We received a suspicious activity call from the store. The store confirmed the purchase was legitimate within minutes," the investigator said evenly. "Why did you continue the detention?" Briggs's jaw clenched. "He was uncooperative." The investigator slid photos across the table screenshots from body cam footage. In one, Julian stood calmly, bag in one hand, receipt in the other. In another, he announced clearly, "I am reaching for my wallet." "Looks cooperative to me," the investigator said. Briggs's voice rose. "He had an attitude." The investigator didn't flinch. "His attitude or his knowledge of his rights?" Briggs's silence was answer enough. In another room, Reynolds faced his own interrogation. "Why didn't you intervene when your partner ignored procedure?" the investigator asked. Reynolds stared at his hands. "I thought Briggs had cause." "What evidence did you personally observe?" Reynolds faltered. "He seemed out of place." "Being black in an upscale store constitutes suspicious behavior?" Reynolds' shoulders slumped. He had no answer. Julian, meanwhile, sat in a Department of Justice conference room, surrounded by civil rights attorneys. A massive screen replayed the sidewalk footage, Briggs pressing him onto the car, cuffs biting, his calm voice narrating each movement. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the projector. "This detention was clearly unlawful," Julian said, his tone professional, detached, almost as if the footage weren't of himself. He pointed with a pen. "Here, the officer ignores my government credential. Here, he fabricates a charge of resistance. And here, he threatens a bystander, lawfully recording." The attorneys nodded grimly. "We'll file both departmental complaints and civil actions." One said. "Not enough," Julian replied. "This needs precedent. Settlements vanish. Public consent decrees create lasting reform." Marcus entered mid-meeting, his presence pulling the room tighter. "The mayor called again," he reported. "They're offering settlements, policy revisions, even public apologies." Julian shook his head. "They want this buried. We need it exposed." Marcus studied his brother, then nodded. "So we set precedent." The boutique tried damage control with a televised apology. The CEO appeared stiff in front of cameras, reading from a script. "We acknowledge our failure," he said, lips pressed tight. "We are instituting mandatory bias training for all employees and donating $2 million to racial justice initiatives." Behind the scenes, executives panicked. Emails leaked. "The Taylor incident threatens our entire East Coast expansion. Fix this before the stock drops further." But it was too late. Customers had spoken louder than shareholders. The police chief faced his own media storm at a press conference packed wall-to-wall with reporters. Sweat pooled at his collar under the hot lights. "We are implementing new protocols," he announced, "requiring articulation of specific suspicious behaviors rather than subjective impressions." "Will officers Briggs and Reynolds face charges?" a reporter shouted. "The investigation is ongoing." "Has the department reached out to previous victims of similar detentions?" another pressed. The chief's discomfort was visible. "We are reviewing past incidents." Across town, Julian watched the press conference on a muted television in his office, jotting notes. His assistant muttered, "They're scrambling." "Good," Julian said. "Discomfort drives change." The fallout reached the officers directly. Briggs faced a disciplinary hearing before a review board. He sat rigid in his chair as body cam footage played on a wall screen, his voice echoing back. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "At what point was Mr. Carter uncooperative?" Briggs sputtered. It was his attitude. The footage contradicted him mercilessly. Julian calm, composed, announcing each move. "Your termination is upheld," the chair declared. "Furthermore, we recommend revocation of your certification." Briggs stood abruptly, face red. 20 years on the force ended because of politics." "No," the chair corrected. "Ended because of misconduct." Reynolds received suspension without pay and mandatory retraining, lesser punishment, but still a career scar. The boutique clerk, meanwhile, became infamous overnight. His tearful interview on local news only worsened things. "I never meant to profile anyone," he sobbed. "I've learned how unconscious bias can Social media shredded him, reposting screenshots of racist posts from his deleted accounts. He couldn't get another retail job. People recognized him on the street. Actions had consequences. Julian, on the other hand, became the face of reform. National news outlets invited him onto panels. He spoke with calm authority, refusing to center himself, always widening the lens. "What happened to me," he told millions of viewers, "happens daily across America. The difference is most victims don't have the Attorney General as a brother. This is not about my name. It's about a system that fails countless others." Congressional hearings on police reform cited the incident repeatedly. "If even the Attorney General's brother isn't safe from bias," one representative thundered, "how can any citizen feel protected?" Insurance companies raised premiums on retailers with histories of profiling claims. Risk assessments now factored in bias. "Discrimination isn't just wrong," a risk consultant explained on CNBC. "It's expensive." 1 month after the incident, Julian addressed cadets at a police academy. His voice carried across the training hall. "Every detention should be based on facts, not feelings," he said. "Split-second bias can destroy lives, careers, and trust. The law isn't just power, it's responsibility." In the front row, young recruits sat stiff, pens scratching, realizing the man before them wasn't just a victim. He was their future judge, their barometer. Even Reynolds found himself speaking to a rookie class during his suspension. His words lacked polish but carried weight. "I failed to intervene when my partner crossed the line," he admitted, voice raw. "That makes me equally responsible. Don't make my mistake." Some cadets shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson born of humiliation. Luxco rebranded itself under a new CEO, a black woman with a background in both retail and civil rights. She appeared on business magazine covers. "We turned a painful incident into a template for change," she said. "Customer satisfaction across demographics has actually improved." But not everyone found redemption. Briggs gave bitter interviews to fringe outlets. "I was just doing my job," he insisted. "Now my career's over because of politics." Even sympathetic hosts pushed back. "The footage shows clear violations of policy and law." Briggs had no reply. Later that night, he sat alone in his apartment, scrolling job listings, mall security, warehouse guard, nothing near his former status. His phone buzzed. Reynolds had texted, "Settlement signed, NDA in place." No such offer came for Briggs. His actions had crossed too many lines. By contrast, Julian's humiliation had transformed into momentum. Standing beside Marcus in the Justice Department's Great Hall, cameras flashing, he addressed the nation. "What began as an unjust detention," he said, "has become an opportunity for systemic change. This is bigger than one street, one store, or one set of handcuffs. It is about rewriting the culture of accountability." Behind him, banners displayed the words, "The Equitable Enforcement Initiative." The Carter brothers hadn't just survived the storm. They were steering it, and America, watching on every screen, knew this was only the beginning. A year had passed since the cuffs snapped shut on Julian Carter's wrists. The marks on his skin had faded, but the marks left on the system had not. Washington looked different now, in ways subtle and seismic. On Wisconsin Avenue, the boutique once synonymous with exclusion had been reborn. The glass doors opened not to suspicious glares but to warm greetings. Gone were the guards shadowing black customers. In their place stood staff trained quarterly in bias-free service. Signs near the entrance displayed a pledge in bold lettering, "Equal service. Every customer, every time." Julian returned quietly one afternoon, a year to the day since that humiliating encounter. The store manager, a poised black woman in her 40s, recognized him instantly. "Mr. Carter," she said, voice reverent. "It's an honor. This store is different because of you." Julian smiled faintly. "Different because it had to be." He browsed at his own pace, selecting a pair of new loafers. No one followed him. No one second-guessed his presence. The cashier rang him up smoothly, thanked him sincerely, and handed over a receipt stamped with the store's new pledge. Outside, sunlight caught the gold lettering. Julian paused for a breath, feeling the subtle weight of transformation. Small victories mattered. Across the city, the police department had its own reckoning. Internal reviews became mandatory. Every detention report required clear articulation of observable behavior, not vague impressions. Numbers told the story. Detentions without arrest dropped by nearly 30%, and racial disparity in those stops narrowed significantly. Recruits at the academy studied the Carter case as a required module. Training officers repeated the warning. This is how quickly bias can destroy your career and your department's credibility. Julian visited precincts nationwide, not as an adversary but as a partner. Standing before rows of uniforms, he spoke plainly. Law enforcement is essential, but it must be applied equally and justly to maintain public trust. When you choose bias over facts, you don't just fail the citizen, you fail the badge. Officers listened, some defensive, others nodding. Change was uncomfortable, but undeniable. Even Reynolds had changed, suspended, disgraced. He had returned humbled, assigned to community relations. He faced the people he once ignored. Over time, his voice grew steadier, his words heavier with truth. I didn't stop my partner when he crossed the line, he admitted to rookie cadets. That makes me complicit. Learn from me. Silence is not neutrality, it's approval. The rookies shifted uncomfortably, but they listened. His shame had become a lesson. Reynolds, determined to rebuild, enrolled in law school at night. His classmates knew him as the officer in the viral video, but also as the man trying to atone. Briggs, meanwhile, remained stuck in the wreckage of his choices. His career in law enforcement was over. Certification revoked. He bounced from odd jobs, mall security, warehouse guard, even brief stints in private security firms that fired him once the media recognized his face. One evening, alone in his dim apartment, Briggs watched a news segment. Julian stood at a podium, addressing law graduates, his words clear and commanding. Briggs's jaw tightened, resentment burning but beneath it. Something else flickered. Recognition, maybe even regret. On the table lay a job application for a community outreach program. He hadn't filled it out yet. Marcus Carter, the Attorney General, had used the incident to catalyze national change. Standing beside his brother, he announced the Equitable Enforcement Initiative, new federal guidelines requiring specific, articulable behaviors in suspicious person reports. A national database tracking detention outcomes by demographic factors. Grants for police departments implementing bias reduction training. Retail industry standards mandating inclusive customer service protocols. 6 months later, data rolled in. Detentions without arrest down nationwide. Disparities narrowing. Not perfect, but progress. The Carter brothers knew sustainability required vigilance, but for the first time, they saw momentum not as fleeting outrage but as durable policy. At the boutique conference hall in New York, CEOs of luxury brands debated fiercely. One risk analyst stood and spoke bluntly. Bias isn't just immoral, it's expensive. The Taylor No, the Carter incident cost Luxco $12 million in settlements, lost sales, and stock collapse. Change your culture or risk your empire. Executives listened, some reluctantly, but they listened. A year to the day, Julian stood in front of a graduating class of law students. The hall buzzed with anticipation. Hundreds of future attorneys leaning forward in their seats. Cameras recorded, live streams broadcast coast to coast. Julian placed his notes aside and spoke without script. The law is powerful, but only when applied equally. Your duty as attorneys is to ensure equality, not just in court, but in every street, every store, every interaction. A year ago, I stood in handcuffs for doing nothing but shopping. I had a choice, react with anger or respond with purpose. I chose purpose, and that choice turned one moment of injustice into momentum for change. The audience sat in rapt silence. He scanned the rows, his gaze landing briefly on one student sitting quietly near the back Reynolds. No uniform now, only a suit and a notebook. Their eyes met. Reynolds gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of paths diverging, then converging again. Julian's voice carried strong. Justice isn't just an outcome in court, it's a practice, lived daily in how we treat each other. On the streets, in stores, in every decision where bias whispers in our ear. Choose better. The applause rose, thunderous, echoing through the hall. Afterward, Marcus met Julian in the Justice Department's marble corridors. The two brothers walked side by side, their conversation softer now. You know, Marcus said, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you weren't who you are. Julian's jaw tightened. I think about that every day. That's why this work matters. Because millions aren't me. And their stories deserve justice, too. They stopped at a window overlooking the Capitol, the city humming below. Systems outlived individuals, but systems could change, if forced. Marcus smiled faintly. Then let's make sure it outlasts both of us. Julian nodded. That's the point. On televisions across the nation, the clip of Julian's speech replayed. Networks called it the Carter Doctrine. Social media called it Ashok purpose over reaction. To some, it was history in the making. To others, it was accountability long overdue. And to Julian Carter, it was unfinished work. Because the story wasn't just about a man in handcuffs. It was about a country deciding what kind of justice it was willing to stand for. Would you have kept your cool like Julian Carter? Or would you have reacted differently? If you believe in accountability and want to see more stories that expose injustice and inspire change, hit that like button now. Subscribe for powerful narratives that don't just entertain but challenge and empower. And tap the notification bell so you never miss a story.